The great ship hung in the sky for a moment, a silent dark shape against the swirling green and blue of the planet below. Then, with a soft hum that didn't belong in that wild place, it was gone. The air it pushed aside came back in a warm, wet sigh, carrying the smell of damp soil and strange, sweet flowers. On the muddy bank of a wide, slow-moving river, 7 figures stood. 6 of them were surrounded by piles of equipment. The 7th, a human named Jay, had only one thing in his hands. Jay took a slow breath. The air was thick but breathable, just like the briefing said. He looked at the tool in his grip. It was a hatchet. The handle was worn smooth from use, and the metal head had a few old scratches. On the handle's end, a small gray rod was firmly set into the polymer. It was his one allowed item. The others were already moving, their voices a mix of clicks, deep rumbles, and translated standard. A large alien, covered in thick, leathery gray skin, was checking a case. This was Kale, a Baran. He was easily 8 feet tall. His 4 arms moved with purpose, unfolding a large scanner from his pile of gear. All items accounted for? Kale's translator boomed in a deep, calm voice. 63. Beginning environmental verification. He pointed the scanner at a nearby tree with blue leaves. Next to him, a much sleeker alien watched. This was Lyra, a Ventathi. She was tall and slender, with large, dark eyes and smooth, pearl-colored skin. Her long fingers danced over a flat panel on her wrist. "My atmospheric condenser is online," she said, her voice like filtered air. "Personal environment stable. I suggest we catalog all local hazards before proceeding." The other aliens, a stocky one with moss-like hair, a pair of insectoid creatures who worked together, began opening their own packs. Each pile was impressive. There were tents that folded out on their own, devices to clean water, tools for analyzing plants, packs of concentrated food, heaters, coolers, lights, and much more. Exactly 63 items each. It was the rule. The Galactic Consortium believed in preparedness. Jay looked at his hatchet. He felt the solid weight of it. He saw Sumin, another human, watching him. She had chosen the 63 items. Her gear was neat and professional. She gave him a small, worried smile. Jay nodded back. He understood her choice. It made sense. Teho, the 3rd human, was already arguing with one of the insectoid aliens about which direction to go. He held up a small holographic map. "The extraction point is north. The river bends here, so we should move away from the bank to avoid difficult terrain." "Negative," the insectoid alien buzzed. "River provides necessary hydration source. Path is logical." Jay didn't join the discussion. He turned and looked at the forest behind them. It was a wall of green, purple, and brown. Vines hung down like ropes. He listened. He heard the call of something that sounded like a bird, the buzz of insects, and the rush of the river. The first step wasn't about direction. It was about shelter, water, and fire. Night would come, and with it the cold. He walked to the edge of the tree line. He picked a straight, dry branch that had fallen. With a few sharp, precise chops of the hatchet, he cut it to the length of his arm. He did this again. He gathered a few more. "What is he doing?" Kale rumbled, glancing up from his scanner. "Primitive ritual, perhaps," Lyra said, not looking up from her wrist panel. "A focus exercise. It is common in less advanced species under stress." Jay wasn't stressed. He was working. He used a long, tough vine he found hanging down. With the back of the hatchet head, he hammered the sharpened ends of his sticks into the soft ground near a large, overhanging rock. He used the vine to tie the tops together, making a simple frame leaning against the rock. He gathered big, broad leaves from a nearby plant and began layering them over the frame, like shingles. In less than 20 minutes, he had a small, basic lean-to. It would stop the rain and break the wind. Back at the gear piles, the group was still debating the best sleeping arrangements for their self-inflating pods. Jay walked to the riverbank. He chose a spot away from where the others were collecting water with a complex pump device. He filled a hollow piece of wood he had also chopped clean with his hatchet. He took a sip. The water tasted wild, but it was cool. He then looked for dry wood. He found a dead, standing tree. A few powerful chops with the hatchet brought down a branch. He split it open with a well-aimed blow. The inside was dry and white. He carried the dry wood back to his lean-to. He used the sharp edge of the hatchet to shave thin curls from the dry wood, making a soft pile of tinder. He then struck the gray ferrocerium rod on the hatchet's handle with the back of the blade. A bright shower of white-hot sparks fell onto the tinder. He blew gently. A tiny curl of smoke appeared, then a small flame. He fed it slowly with more shavings, then small sticks. Soon, a steady, warm fire was crackling. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in colors of orange and purple. The aliens had finally decided on a camp location. They were using a sonic device to clear the plants from the ground. They were struggling to sync their various pieces of equipment. Jay sat by his fire. He warmed his hands. He looked at the hatchet lying on the ground beside him. It was a tool, an extension of his own hands. With it, he had made shelter, gathered water, and made fire. The three most important things. He looked over at the others, their shapes moving in the twilight, surrounded by their 63 marvels of technology. Sumin was looking at him, then at his small fire, then back at her own unopened heating unit. A thoughtful frown was on her face. Kale's voice carried across the clearing. The human has compromised his safety with that open flame. It will attract predators. My scanner has already detected multiple life forms in the vicinity. Jay poked his fire with a stick. He was not afraid of the dark. He had light. He was not afraid of the cold. He had warmth. The night sounds of the alien forest grew louder, but Jay just listened, learning them. He had only one item, but he was already home. The morning light was gray and cold, filtered through a mist that rose from the river. Jay was already awake. His small fire was now just glowing coals. He added a few dry sticks and blew on them until flames sprang up again. He warmed his hands, the heat feeling good in the damp air. Across the clearing, the others were starting to move. It was a slow process. Kale, the big Baran, was carefully packing his scanner into a specific case. Lyra was running a diagnostic on her environmental suit, her brow furrowed. The two insectoid aliens, who worked as a pair, were methodically checking each of their 126 combined items. Teho, who had the holographic map, walked over to Jay. "We should move soon. The map shows a good path if we head east from the river here." Jay looked north into the dense forest. "The extraction point is that way," he said, pointing with his hatchet. "Yes, but the terrain is bad," Teho said, pointing at his map. "See these markings? Thick forest and possible swamps. My map data says east is clearer." Jay listened. He looked at the trees directly north. He saw tall, strong trees with high canopies. He saw bird-like creatures flying in that direction. "Animals usually take the easiest path too," Jay said. "The birds are flying north. The land might rise that way. Higher ground is better." Teho looked unsure. He trusted his device. "I'll see what the others think." The group meeting took a long time. Kale wanted to finish his full area scan. Lyra was worried about moisture levels in the air affecting her equipment. It was almost midday when they finally decided to compromise. They would go east for half a day, as Teho suggested. Jay did not argue. He put out his fire carefully with mud from the riverbank. He took his hatchet and walked to a tree at the edge of the clearing facing north. With 3 quick chops, he made a deep, clear notch in the bark. It was a simple sign for himself. Then he followed the others east. The walk was hard. Even with their clear path, the undergrowth was thick with thorny vines. Kale's large size meant he had to push through, breaking branches. His suit got snagged often. The insectoid aliens moved quickly, but their many delicate instruments kept catching on leaves. Jay walked at the back. He watched. He saw Sumin struggling with her heavy pack. He moved up beside her. Without a word, he used his hatchet to cut a long, straight stick from a tree. He used a vine to tie it to her pack, creating a simple frame to carry it more easily. She looked surprised, then grateful. "Thank you," she said quietly. After a few hours, They came to a wide, rocky stream. It was not deep, but the stones were slick. Kale took out a device and scanned the water. It is safe to cross. No dangerous life forms detected. Lyra looked worried. The current is strong. My suit is not designed for submerged crossing. They began a discussion about the best way to cross. Should they look for a bridge? Should they use their climbing gear to go over the trees? Should they inflate a raft from one of their kits? Jay walked up to the stream's edge. He studied the rocks. He saw a path of flatter, drier stones that went across in a zigzag pattern. It wasn't perfect, but it was solid. He stepped onto the first rock. It was steady. He moved to the next, using his hatchet like a balance pole. In less than a minute, he was on the other side. He turned and looked back. The others stared. Their debate stopped. One by one, they followed, carefully placing their feet where Jay had stepped. Lyra, with her long legs, managed well. Kale was slower, his weight making the rocks shift slightly. But they all crossed. No devices needed. They stopped to rest on the other side. Teho checked his map. This is not the clear path it showed. This is difficult. Kale was scanning the area again. My readings indicate the plant life here is more aggressive. There are more thorns. Sumin sat on a rock, rubbing her shoulders. She watched Jay. He was not resting. He was walking the edge of their little camp, looking at plants. He saw a tree with peeling, papery bark. He used the hatchet to carefully peel off a large sheet. He folded it and put it under his belt. What is that for? Sumin asked. It's dry. Good for tinder later. For the fire, he said. Fire. The word made Lyra look up. A fire is not efficient. It consumes resources and produces a detectable signature. My heating unit is safer. As if to prove her point, she took out a small silver disc. She pressed a button. A gentle hum came from it, and she held her hands over it. Efficient, clean heat. Just then, a cold wind blew through the trees. The mist from the morning had never fully left, and now the air grew damp and chilly. Lyra's heating unit hummed, but the warmth it gave was small, just for her hands. Jay walked to the center of their resting area. He cleared a circle of leaves and dirt with the side of his hatchet. He gathered some of the dry wood they had pushed aside when making camp. He split a larger log with 3 strong chops. He made his pile of shavings with the blade's edge. He knelt, struck the ferro rod on his hatchet, and the sparks flew. This time, Sumin watched closely. She saw how the shavings caught. She saw how he built the fire from tiny to small, to a strong, warm blaze. The heat reached out, touching everyone in the circle. It pushed back the damp chill from the air. Kale, who was feeling the cold in his joints, unconsciously moved a little closer. The insectoid aliens did the same, their delicate limbs seeking the warmth. Lyra's heating unit hummed uselessly in her hand. The fire's light danced in her large eyes. She looked from her one small device to Jay's fire, which warmed 7 people. She did not say anything. She just turned her unit off. Jay fed the fire another piece of wood. He did not look proud. He looked practical. The sun was already starting to go down. They had traveled very little distance. They had spent their time talking, scanning, and worrying about their 63 items. He had spent his time walking, watching, and preparing. The night was coming again, and he had the one thing they all now silently wanted: a real, living fire. The rain started in the night. It was not a gentle rain. It fell hard and heavy, drumming on the leaves above. It found its way through every Jay's small lean-to. The fire hissed and steamed where the rain blew in, but the main part of the shelter held. He had built the roof with a steep angle so the water would run off. He stayed dry, wrapped in the warmth of the fire's last heat from the stones he had placed near it. The others were not so lucky. Their self-inflating pods were waterproof, but they had placed them on low ground. The rain ran down the hill and gathered around them. The insectoid alien's pod sprang a leak when a sharp rock underneath punctured it. They spent the wet, dark hours trying to patch it with a repair kit, their buzzing voices full of frustration. When the gray light of morning came, the camp was a sad sight. Everything was soaked. The ground was a muddy soup. Kale's scanner, left outside to monitor the area, was filled with water and broken. He held the dead device in his large hands. A low rumble of disappointment coming from him. Lyra's environmental suit had kept her dry, but her atmospheric condenser had failed in the damp. She could not extract clean water from the air now. Her face, usually so calm, was tight with worry. "We must dry the equipment," Kale announced, water dripping from his gray skin. "We must assess the damage." They began the long, miserable task. They spread wet gear on rocks and branches. Packs of concentrated food were soaked and swollen. Electronic devices showed dark, dead screens. The mood was low and quiet. Only the sound of the rain and the river, which was now louder and faster, filled the air. Jay left his shelter. He walked to the river's edge and looked. The water was brown and angry, moving fast. It was much higher than the day before. He knew what this meant. He had seen floods in the mountains back home. He walked back to the group quickly. "We need to move," he said. His voice was calm but firm. "The river is rising fast. This whole bank will be underwater." Teho looked up from trying to fix his wet map projector. "The weather forecast in my data didn't predict this level of precipitation." "The river doesn't read your data," Jay said. He pointed to debris caught in the trees farther up the bank. A clear line showed where the water had risen before. That line was far above where they were now sitting. "We need to go to higher ground. Now." The group moved slowly, burdened by wet gear and low spirits. They started gathering their soaked items. Took too long. As they argued about what to carry and what to leave, the river growled louder. Then it happened. A wall of water, not from rain here but from far upstream, came around the bend. It was a flash flood. It rushed over the bank with a sound like thunder. "Move!" Jay shouted. Chaos. Kale grabbed two of his equipment cases and tried to run, but the water was already at his knees, then his waist. The current was strong. One of the insectoid aliens was swept off its feet, its many limbs flailing. Lyra tried to run but slipped in the mud. Jay did not run from the water. He ran towards the nearest large tree. He shoved Su-min, who was frozen in fear, towards it. "Climb! Up!" he yelled. He saw Teho struggling. He grabbed the man's arm and pulled him to the same tree. "Climb!" He then turned and saw Kale. The big Baran was fighting the current, but his heavy gear was pulling him down. Jay waded into the cold, rushing water, pushed hard against him. He used the hatchet to hook onto a thick root, holding himself steady. He reached out his other hand. "Drop the cases!" he shouted at Kale. Kale, his eyes wide, finally let go of the heavy metal boxes. They sank instantly. Freed from the weight, he surged forward and grabbed Jay's arm. Jay pulled with all his strength, helping the huge alien find footing on the higher root system of the tree. Together, they pushed and pulled Lyra and the two soaked insectoid aliens to the base of the large tree. They clung there, wet and shocked, as the brown water rushed past them. It took several minutes for the main force of the flood to pass, leaving behind a wrecked camp. Mud and broken branches were everywhere. Most of their gear was gone. Swept away or buried, silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing and the trickle of receding water. They climbed down to what was left. It was almost nothing. A few torn packs. A single, muddy heating unit. Their faces showed their despair. Everything they had relied on was gone. Kale sat heavily on a muddy rock. The scanner, the water purifier, all of it. He sounded lost. Lyra looked at her useless condenser. "Without my equipment, the moisture in this air will damage my respiratory system within days," she said quietly, almost to herself. Jay walked through the mud. He found his shelter was gone, washed away. But he still had his hatchet, tied securely to his belt. He pulled it free. The water had not hurt it. It was just a piece of wood and steel. He did not talk about the lost gear. He looked at the people. They were cold, wet, and shocked. They needed the basics again. Shelter, fire, warmth. He walked to the high ground he had tried to lead them to hours before. He began to chop. He cut strong poles for a new, bigger shelter. He cut vines to tie them. He worked without stopping, his movements sure and steady. The others watched him. They had nothing to do. Their purpose had been washed away with their items. One by one, they moved to the high ground. They watched the human with the single tool rebuild the world from nothing. Sumin was the first to move. She picked up a pole Jay had cut. "Where does this one go?" she asked. Jay showed her. Then Taeho started gathering vines. Even Kale, his huge arms strong, began to lift the heavy main supports into place. Jay did not tell them what to do. He just did his job and they followed. By nightfall, they had a rough but solid shelter on the high ground. And in the center of it, Jay built a fire. He used the dry, papery bark he had collected the day before. He used the shavings from the new wood. The spark from his hatchet caught, and the flames grew, pushing back the deep, cold dark of the alien night. They sat around it, all of them. They were hungry. They had lost their food. They were tired. But they were dry and they were warm. They stared into the flames, thinking about 63 items sitting at the bottom of a muddy river. And they looked at the one item that had saved them and was now keeping them alive. Morning came clear and cold. The flood had washed the sky clean. Sunlight filtered down through the tall trees onto the muddy survivors. The group was quiet. They sat around the ashes of last night's fire. Their clothes were stiff and dirty. They had no packs, no devices, no food. Kale stared at his empty hands. Lyra looked up at the trees as if seeing them for the first time. Her usual calm replaced by a deep tiredness. Jay was already moving. He took his hatchet and walked to a straight, young tree. With 3 sharp blows, he cut it down. He trimmed the branches and cut the trunk into 2 long poles. He used a tough vine to tie them together at one end, making a tall shape. "What is that for?" Taeho asked, his voice hollow. "A drying rack," Jay said. "We need to dry our clothes and whatever we can find. Wet things make you cold. Cold makes you weak." It made simple sense. Sumin began to help. She spread her wet jacket over the poles. Others followed, hanging their damp things. The sun slowly began to warm the fabric. Next, Jay looked at the river. It was back to its normal level, but the water was still brown. They had no purifiers. "We need clean water," Lyra said, stating the obvious fear. Jay walked away from the main river. He went up the high ground, looking closely at the plants and the slope of the land. He found what he was looking for. A trickle of clear water coming from a mossy rock. It was a spring. The water came from deep in the ground, filtered by stone. It was safe that he used his hatchet to dig a small hole below the rock, letting it fill with clear water. He took a drink first, then called the others. They drank deeply, the cold, clean water a small comfort. But the bigger problem was food. Their stomachs were empty. The insectoid aliens clicked nervously. They needed specific nutrients. Jay went back to the river, now calm. He stood on a flat rock and watched the water. He saw a flicker of silver. Fish. They were long and thin. He took his hatchet and cut a slender, green sapling. He used the blade to sharpen one end to a fine point, making a spear. He stood perfectly still for a long time, then struck fast. He pulled the spear up. A wriggling silver fish was impaled on the end. He did this 3 more times. He brought the fish back to camp. He used the sharp edge of the hatchet to clean them, scraping off the scales and removing the insides. He found flat stones near the old fire pit and placed them close to the coals. He put the fish on the hot stones. Soon, a good smell filled the air. The others watched, their hunger growing. Jay handed the first cooked fish to Sumin. He gave the next to Taeho. He offered one to Kale. The big alien took it carefully, then ate it in 2 bites. "It is sufficient," he rumbled, but his eyes said it was more than that. It was life. Lyra looked at the last fish. Her species did not eat flesh. "I cannot," she said softly. Jay nodded. He had noticed something earlier. He walked to a different part of the forest, where large ferns grew. He used the hatchet to dig at the base of one, revealing a thick, pale root. He cut a piece off and cleaned it. He brought it back and placed it on the hot stone next to the fish. It began to cook, turning softer and giving off a starchy smell. He offered it to Lyra. "Try this." She took it, sniffed it, then took a small bite. Her expression changed. "It is acceptable. It has carbohydrates." They ate in silence. It was not a big meal, but it was something. The simple act of eating real food, not from a pack, changed them. It grounded them. After eating, the reality set in. They had to move north. But they had no map, no guidance. Teho looked lost. "My map is gone. I don't know the way." Jay picked up his hatchet. He walked to the edge of their camp and looked at the sun. It was morning, so the sun was in the east. He pointed with his hatchet. "North is that way. The moss on these trees grows thicker on the north side. See?" He showed them. The trees had a clear, green moss patch on one side. "We follow that." It was so simple. Kale, who had always trusted his scanner, looked at the tree. He reached out and touched the moss. He was learning to read the world, not a screen. They began to pack up. They had almost nothing to pack. Jay used his hatchet to cut a piece of flexible bark and some more vines. In a few minutes, he made a simple carrying bag. He put the remaining cooked fern root inside, and a few dry pieces of tinder. He also made a water skin from a large, hollow gourd he found, cleaning it out and plugging it with a carved piece of wood. Sumin watched him. She tried to copy him, making her own rough bag. Teho did the same. They were no longer carrying 63 items. They were carrying knowledge and the one tool that made that knowledge useful. Before they left, Jay did one more thing. He went to a tree at the edge of their camp, facing the direction they would go. He lifted his hatchet and made 3 deep, clean notches in the bark. "Why do you do that?" Lyra asked. "In case we get turned around," Jay said. "So we can find this place again. Or so others would know someone was here." It was a message. It was a record. It was a sign made not with light on a screen, but with steel in wood. It would last. They started walking north. Jay led, using the trees and the sun as his guide. The others followed. They walked more slowly than before, but they were not weighed down. They were not debating which machine to use. They were just walking, watching the human with the hatchet who knew how to find water, food, and direction in a world that had taken everything else from them. They were not a group of well-equipped explorers anymore. They were survivors, following the one person who seemed to remember what survival really meant. The forest changed as they walked north. The trees grew taller, their canopies blocking more of the sky. The air became cooler. A quiet tension grew in the group. It started with Kale. The big Baran stopped walking. He looked at the trees, then back the way they had come. His face was hard to read, but his posture was stiff. "This is not efficient," Kale said, his voice a low rumble. "We are moving blind. The human's method is unpredictable." Lyra stood beside him. She touched the bark of a tree, her fingers coming away clean. "The moss was less obvious here." "He is correct. My internal chronometer suggests our pace is too slow. Without my equipment to scan for optimal paths, we are wasting energy." Teho looked nervous. He trusted Jay, but he also missed the certainty of his map. "Maybe we should stop and make a better plan," he suggested. Jay listened. He did not argue. He simply waited, his hatchet hanging loosely in his hand. "The consortium protocol for equipment loss is to minimize risk and await rescue," Kale stated. "We should fortify a position and send a consistent signal." "With what?" Sumin asked, her voice sharp. "Our signal beacons are at the bottom of the river. We have no power sources." "Then we should find high ground and create a visual marker," Lyra replied. "A structured approach. Not this wandering." Jay finally spoke. His voice was calm. "The extraction point is not coming to us. We have to go to it. The path is north. Walking is the plan." Kale shook his large head. "You operate on guesswork, on signs in moss. My people are builders, planners. We do not guess." He gestured to the 2 insectoid aliens who clicked in agreement. "We will use our strength to build a permanent shelter. We will find a way to be seen. That is the logical choice. There was a long silence. The group stood divided on the narrow path. Sumin looked from Kale to Jay. She thought about the fire in the rain, the fish from the river, the clean water from the spring. She thought about the weight of a pack full of broken things. She took a step and stood next to Jay. I will go north. Taeho hesitated, chewing his lip. He looked at Kale's strong arms, then at Jay's quiet certainty. He thought of the hot stone that had cooked the fish. He moved to stand beside Sumin. Me too. Lyra was the last to choose. She looked at Kale, her fellow advanced being. She looked at her own delicate hands, made for operating panels, not for digging roots. But she also remembered the deep, penetrating warmth of the open fire that her heating unit could never match. She remembered the taste of the cooked fern root. She took a slow breath and walked to stand with the humans. I will continue, she said quietly. The group was split. Kale and the two insectoid aliens would stay to build and wait. Jay, Sumin, Taeho, and Lyra would continue north. Before they parted, Jay walked up to Kale. He didn't offer advice. Instead, he did something practical. He used his hatchet to cut a long, straight branch. He used a vine to lash his own ferrocerium rod, the one from his hatchet handle, firmly to the end. He struck it with a rock. It sparked brightly. For your fire, Jay said, handing the branch to Kale. Keep it dry. Kale took it, surprised. It was the one piece of Jay's tool, given away. He gave a slow, deep nod. It was the only thank you he could manage. Then Jay turned and led his small group north. They walked for the rest of the day. The forest was quiet. Now Jay began to teach. He showed Sumin how to look for the driest wood by listening to the sound it made when tapped. He showed Taeho how to find the strong, flexible vines for tying, not the brittle ones. For Lyra, he had a different lesson. He stopped at a plant with wide, bowl-shaped leaves. See the way the water gathers here after rain? He said. You can drink from this leaf. It is clean from the sky. He pointed to another plant with a waxy purple flower. Where these flowers grow, the ground is softer. Often there is water underneath. Lyra stared, her large eyes taking it in. This is biological data acquisition, she whispered. She was not just walking anymore. She was studying. She was learning the language of the planet. When they made camp that evening, Jay let the others work. Sumin gathered tinder. Taeho built the fire ring with stones. Lyra used her sharp eyes to find the driest, finest kindling. Jay watched as Sumin struck a piece of flint they had found against the steel of his hatchet blade. She had to try a few times, but finally, a spark caught. She blew gently on the tiny ember in the tinder, her hands cupped carefully. A small flame rose. Her face lit up with a smile of pure triumph. She had made fire. They cooked more roots Lyra had identified. They drank from a stream Jay had found by following animal tracks. They were a team. As they sat by the fire, Lyra spoke, her eyes on the flames. I believe technology was a layer between us and danger, a shield, but it was also a wall. It kept me from seeing the world. She looked at the hatchet, now missing its fire-starting rod, but no less useful. Your tool does not build a wall. It opens a door. Jay just nodded. He sharpened the edge of the hatchet on a smooth stone. The sound was steady and rhythmic. It was the sound of preparation. It was the sound of moving forward one simple, solid step at a time. The night was vast and unknown around them, but their fire was bright, and they had all helped to build it. The days settled into a rhythm. They walked at dawn. They stopped at dusk. Jay's notches on the trees were their only map. The small group worked together well. They were learning. Lyra had become their best forager. Her keen eyes noticed edible berries and safe roots that even Jay missed. Sumin was good with the fire and with making simple things from bark and vine. Taeho kept their spirits up with jokes, and he was always finding good, straight walking sticks. But the forest was not empty. They all felt it. Something was watching. At first, it was just signs. A pile of scat on the trail that wasn't there the day before. A deep scratch mark on a tree trunk, higher than Jay's head. The normal sounds of birds and insects would sometimes stop completely, leaving a heavy, waiting silence. Jay grew more careful. He checked the edges of their camp every morning. He looked for tracks. One evening, he showed the others how to make a simple alarm. He took a long, thin vine and tied it in a circle around their sleeping area, about ankle-high. He hung empty gourds from it in a few places. If something big moved through the vine in the night, the gourds would rattle. "Will that stop a predator?" Taeho asked, trying to sound brave. "No," Jay said plainly. "But it will stop us from being surprised. A warning is time. Time is a chance." 2 nights later, the warning came. A deep, coughing roar echoed from the south, from the direction of Kale's camp. It was a sound of anger and fear. It was cut short. Then, silence again, deeper and more terrible than before. The group around Jay's fire froze. Sumin's hand went to her mouth. Lyra's large eyes were wide. The message was clear. The thing out there was hunting, and it had found the others. "We have to move camp. Now," Jay said, his voice low and urgent. "It's dark," Taeho whispered, panic in his voice. "It's more dangerous to stay," Jay said. He was already scattering the fire, burying the coals with dirt. "It knows where the sound came from. It might come to investigate." They moved quickly in the moonlight, gathering their few things. Jay led them away from the river, up a steep, rocky slope. It was hard going, but it was not a place a large animal would easily follow. They huddled together under an overhang of rock, shivering in the dark, listening. They heard nothing more that night. The next day, they moved with a new fear. Every shadow was a threat. They found a good place for a camp early, a small, flat clearing surrounded by thick, thorny bushes. Jay knew they needed more than a vine alarm now. He set them to work. "We need a wall, not to keep it out forever, to slow it down, to make it noisy." They used their hands and Jay's hatchet. They cut dozens of long, sharp sticks. They wedged them into the ground at an angle, points facing outward, all around the clearing except for one narrow path. They piled more thorny branches in front of the sticks. It was a rough, ugly barrier, but it looked mean and it would be loud to push through. Lyra helped weave the branches together. Her long fingers were good at it. "It is a passive deterrent system," she said, almost to herself. "It increases the cost of entry." As the sun set, Jay made one more preparation. He gathered a big pile of the dry, papery bark and the most resinous pine-like branches he could find. He made a loose, fluffy nest of it and placed it near the center of the camp, with smaller piles near the walls. He kept his hatchet close. The night fell. They did not light a fire. They sat in the dark, listening. The attack did not come from the ground. It came from the trees. A dark, sleek shape, longer than Jay was tall, dropped from a branch just outside the thorn wall. It landed without a sound. It was all muscle and shadow, with 6 powerful limbs and a long necklace head full of teeth that glinted in the starlight. It moved toward the narrow entrance in their wall. Jay was already moving. He did not run at the beast. He ran to the prepared nest of tinder. He slammed the blade of his hatchet down onto a rock right beside it. The strike created a bright spark, but not enough. The creature pushed through the entrance, thorns snapping. It was inside the clearing. Sumin screamed. Taeho stumbled back. The creature's eyes, reflective and cold, fixed on them. Jay acted on pure instinct. He grabbed the whole nest of tinder and one of the resin branches. He sprinted not away from the creature, but parallel to it, toward the wall. As he ran, he dragged the hatchet blade hard along the rock wall of the overhang. A screaming shower of sparks, brighter than any from the ferro rod, flew into the dry tinder and resin in his hands. Caught instantly. He had a torch. He threw the burning bundle not at the creature, but at the pile of dry materials near the wall where it had entered. Fire leaped up with a whoosh, creating a sudden, blazing wall of light and heat between the predator and the others. The creature recoiled, hissing. It hated the fire. It turned toward Jay, who was now closer, his hatchet in one hand, a smaller burning branch in the other. Jay stood his ground. He didn't swing. He thrust the fire toward the creature's face. He yelled, not a word, but a raw, challenging sound from deep in his chest. The beast snapped at the flames, then flinched back, confused and angry. The light was blinding it. The heat was painful. It looked from Jay to the bigger fire, to the other humans, then back to the bright, shouting thing with the fire and the metal. With a final, frustrated snarl, it turned and bounded back through the thorny entrance, disappearing into the dark forest. Jay stood there, breathing hard, the firelight dancing on his face. He slowly lowered the burning branch. The others were silent, shocked. The defense had not been a fight. It had been a message, written in sudden, terrifying fire. A message the creature understood. This cost is too high. They spent the rest of the night feeding the fires, keeping the circle of light bright. No one slept. They had faced the danger of this world not with a weapon from a list, but with preparation, with understanding, and with the clever, terrifying use of the oldest tool of all. The final days of walking were quiet. The memory of the predator's eyes in the firelight stayed with them. They moved with more care, but also with a new kind of confidence. They had been tested. They had survived. The land began to change. The thick forest opened into rocky hills. The air grew cooler and thinner. One afternoon, they climbed a steep ridge. At the top, Teho pointed, his voice a tired whisper. Look! Below them, in a wide, flat clearing of gray stone, was a simple metal platform. It was the extraction point. It was just sitting there, silent and empty under the wide, alien sky. There was no ship yet. They made their way down. Their steps were slow. They were ragged. Their clothes were torn and stained. Sumin had a long scratch on her arm. Teho walked with a slight limp. Lyra's pearl-colored skin was smudged with dirt and soot. Jay's hatchet hung from his belt, its edge nicked and worn, the handle dark with sweat and earth. They reached the platform and sat on its edge, too tired to celebrate. They just waited. About an hour later, they heard the sound. A low hum from the south. A ship, sleek and silver, descended from the clouds. It was not the same luxury cruiser that had dropped them off. This was a smaller, functional consortium retrieval vessel. The ship landed gently on the platform. A door slid open. Out walked the Salachi overseer, a tall, slender being with gray, hairless skin and large, black eyes. It wore a simple silver suit. Behind it came two others, carrying a floating stretcher. On the stretcher was Kale. The big Baran was alive, but one of his forearms was wrapped in a thick bandage. His face was drawn with pain. The two insectoid aliens followed, their limbs clicking softly, their bodies showing signs of injury. They had made it, but just barely. The Salachi's eyes swept over the two groups. It looked at Kale's injured form, at the lost, haunted look in the insect's eyes. Then it looked at Jay's group. The overseer's gaze was intelligent and curious, took in their condition. They were thin and dirty, but their eyes were clear. They stood together, watching back. The Salachi looked at their simple bark bags, their gourd waterskins. It looked at the worn hatchet on Jay's hip. Its eyes lingered on the notches and scratches on the handle, the slight curve worn into the wood from 1,000 grips. The trial is concluded, the Salachi said, its voice smooth and without emotion. You have endured. The medics began to help Kale onto the ship. The insectoid aliens scurried aboard, not looking back. The Salachi gestured for Jay's group to follow as they walked toward the ramp. The Salachi spoke again, this time only to Jay. Your item profile was noted as an anomaly, a single multipurpose primitive tool. The data suggested a low probability of success. Jay stopped. He looked at the hatchet in his hand. He thought about the fire in the rain, the fish from the river, the shelter on the high ground, the look in Sumin's eyes when she made her first spark, the wall of thorns and the blinding, beautiful terror of the fire in the dark. He looked back at the Salachi. He didn't know how to explain that it wasn't the tool. It was the thinking. The tool was just the answer to the questions the world asked. When you have 63 answers, you forget how to listen for the questions. He didn't say any of that. He just gave a small, tired shrug. It was enough. They walked up the ramp into the clean, bright, sterile ship. The air inside was filtered and still. It smelled of nothing. As the door slid shut behind them, Jay looked out one last time at the rocky clearing, the gray platform, the vast and wild forest beyond. The others found seats and sank into them with deep sighs. Jay remained standing by the viewport. Sumin came and stood beside him. She didn't speak. She just looked out with him. The ship lifted off. The platform grew small below them. The planet became a ball of green and blue, hanging in the blackness. The Salachi stood at the front of the cabin, its hands behind its back. It was looking at a data screen, but it wasn't really reading. It was thinking. It was thinking about 63 items scattered in a river mud. It was thinking about one item, carried every step, used for everything, now resting quietly against a human's leg as he looked at the stars. The lesson was not in the survival. Others had survived before. The lesson was in the silence of that one human. He had not complained about what he lacked. He had simply taken what he had, and with it, he had spoken back to the wilderness. And the wilderness had listened. The ship turned toward the stars. The trial was over, but the understanding was just beginning. In the quiet hum of the ship, Jay finally sat down. He placed the hatchet on the floor between his feet. He closed his eyes. He had endured, not with a list of things but with a single simple idea: to adapt, to observe, to use what was there. And that idea, he now knew, was the most powerful tool of all.